Before we dive in, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our deep dives into the most chilling, bizarre, and haunting true crime stories ever told. What you're about to hear is not for the faint of heart. This is a story of the woods, of a predator hiding in plain sight, and of ordinary people who, in the space of a few minutes, stepped into the path of a man whose idea of a walk in the forest wasn't about fresh air. It was about the hunt. When you're heading out to kill someone, there's an unspoken rule. If even one person sees you, your hunt is over for the day. That was the mindset of the man we're about to meet. But on an autumn afternoon in Cherokee County, Georgia, he was seen, and not by just one person. A sheriff's deputy, thinking he was dealing with something minor, pulled up to question a man parked on private hunting land. The deputy thought at worst this was a trespasser, maybe a drifter. Harmless. "Good afternoon, sir. What are you doing out here?" the deputy asked, stepping toward the van. The man, thin and wiry with a friendly smile, chuckled as though he'd been caught doing something mildly embarrassing. "Well, you're the fourth person who stopped to ask me that. I guess they called you, didn't they?" His voice was casual, almost amused. He told the deputy he was just looking for a place to camp while on his way to cut, whatever that meant. Said he was leaving soon, gathering his maps. "They're very strict around here about who they let in," he added, almost in defense of himself. What the deputy didn't know was that behind that calm, chatty exterior sat a calculating predator with a bloody past. This was not just a man camping in the woods. This was someone who had already killed. Someone who, even now, was thinking ahead to the next time he would. But at that moment, the conversation felt almost neighborly. The man even joked about hunters in the area, saying, "I could wear a purple shirt and a red backpack, and they'd still warn me I'm going to get shot." He laughed, then added, "But hey, today I'm just hiking with my dog. No killing today." He asked the deputy if he wanted to see his ID. "You can find it in that fanny pack right there," he said. "No weapons in there, absolutely not." The deputy followed him back to the van, completely unaware that this man, Gary Michael Hilton, was one of the most dangerous individuals he'd ever meet. In the months to come, Hilton's name would be connected to a series of disappearances, mutilations, and murders, stretching across multiple states. The horror began to come into focus weeks earlier in Lyon County, Florida. On December 3, 2007, friends of 46-year-old nurse and Sunday school teacher Cheryl Dunlap began to worry. Cheryl hadn't shown up for her Bible class the day before, and now she'd missed work at Florida State University. This wasn't like her. She was reliable, steady, deeply rooted in her faith and community. Her adult son stopped by her house looking for answers. The moment he walked in, his heart sank. Cheryl's dog was still there, alone. She never left the animal without making arrangements. Police began piecing together her last known movements. On the morning of December 1st, Cheryl had told a friend she was going to the public library. She logged into a library computer at 9:45 a.m. and then cashed a $100 check just after 11 a.m. After that, nothing. No calls, no sightings, just silence. Her friends told investigators she'd been talking about wanting more adventure in her life, maybe even travel. But walking away from her job, her friends, and her sons? Impossible. The first real break came when her car was found near the entrance to Leon Sinks Geological Park. At first glance, it looked like it had simply been abandoned. But a closer inspection revealed unsettling details. Her purse and keys still inside, belongings scattered on the seats, one tire flat. And that flat tire? It looked like it had been deliberately punctured. Then came an even darker sign. A faint foul odor was reported coming from the trunk. Investigators opened it. Nothing. But the suspicion that something terrible had happened only deepened. Cheryl's friends and family were shaken to their core. One friend described it simply, "I've lost a brother, a sister, my parents, and nothing has ever hit me like this." 2 days after she vanished, Cheryl's ATM card was used 5 separate times, draining over $700 from her account. Whoever had her card knew her PIN. That meant one thing: they had either threatened her or someone she loved. When police reviewed the bank's security footage, the pit in their stomachs grew. It wasn't Cheryl making the withdrawals. Instead, a tall, thin figure concealed behind a homemade mask appeared on the screen. No obvious identifiers, no way to know who they were, yet. Weeks passed without answers. And then, hundreds of miles north, another disappearance would drag this shadowy figure into the light. On New Year's Day, 2008, 24-year-old Meredith Emerson left a note for her roommate before heading out with her black lab, Ella, to hike Blood Mountain in Georgia. When she didn't return that night, her roommate filed a missing persons report. Meredith's boyfriend found her car in a trailhead parking lot. Inside were her belongings: Everything except Meredith and her dog. Witnesses recalled seeing her that day on the trail, and also noticing something else, an older man nearby, lurking, watching. Some said they came upon an odd scene, a disturbed patch of trail, items scattered on the ground, and an expandable police baton lying there as if dropped mid-struggle. The description of the man was consistent. Around 60 years old, 5'10", thin build, accompanied by a large reddish dog. Police began to wonder, was this the same man in the bank video who had used Cheryl's ATM card? 2 women, both alone in national forest land. Both vanishing without a trace. Then came the tip that connected the dots. A businessman named John Tabor called investigators, saying he recognized the description. The man was Gary Michael Hilton. He'd worked for Tabor selling home siding until Hilton demanded money and threatened to kill him. He drove a white Chevrolet Astro van. And yes, he had a red dog named Dandy. From that moment, the hunt was on. Meanwhile, in Florida, the Cheryl Dunlap investigation took a grim turn. On December 15th, 2 weeks after she was last seen, a hunter in the forest spotted vultures circling overhead. He went to investigate. At first, he thought it was a deer carcass lying beneath some branches. But as he stepped closer, he saw human skin, a human foot. The body was badly decomposed, stripped nude, partially hidden under palm fronds and branches. Both hands were missing. She had been decapitated. And the brutality didn't stop there. Her nipples had been cut off. Because of the state of the remains, the medical examiner could only list the cause of death as homicidal violence. But everyone knew they were dealing with a sadistic killer. Within weeks, Hilton would be arrested in Georgia after multiple sightings of him with his red dog and white van. But when the cuffs clicked shut, Meredith was still missing, and the man in custody wasn't talking. When Gary Michael Hilton was brought into custody, he didn't act like most suspects in a high-profile missing persons case. He didn't cry, didn't plead for a lawyer, didn't show fear. Instead, he lay flat on the floor of the Georgia Bureau of Investigation's interview room, claiming his multiple sclerosis made it too painful to sit up. Special Agent Clay Bridges tried to coax him into conversation. "I understand you're a distance runner, very healthy genius level, some people say. I'd rather talk to you face to face." Hilton barely responded, his eyes fixed somewhere far away. Bridges threw out a subtle bait. "It's a whole lot warmer down here than it was up on Blood Mountain." Nothing, just silence. Doctors checked him over. He was fine enough to talk. But Hilton refused to answer questions about Meredith Emerson. He wasn't going to make it easy for them. Even so, investigators already had threads connecting him to another murder, Cheryl Dunlap's in Florida. Campsites Hilton had used in Leon County yielded a horrifying clue, a burn pit containing charred human bones and skull fragments. There wasn't enough left to confirm identity through DNA, but police were certain they'd found what remained of Cheryl's missing head. Then there were the zip ties, black, heavy-duty 18-inch strips of plastic that matched the kind Hilton used to restrain Meredith. They were left behind in both cases. But perhaps most chilling of all was what they found in Hilton's van, a Sony digital camera and multiple memory sticks. Some held harmless clips, Hilton playing with his dog Dandy, narrating his hikes. Others that would later reveal darkness no one could unsee. While evidence was piling up, investigators still needed Meredith alive, or at least her body, to close the case. And the only man who could lead them to her was stubbornly silent. At first, over time, the GBI agents shifted tactics. They stopped hammering him with questions and started listening, letting him talk about whatever he wanted. That's when Hilton's self-portrait began to take shape. A man who saw himself as a philosopher, an artist, a professional in the hunt. He spoke of his disdain for women, his contempt for societal rules, and his belief that life was only truly authentic when lived outside of it. When the conversation turned to January 1st on Blood Mountain, Hilton dropped the facade of vagueness. He claimed he first saw Meredith where 2 trails intersected, their dogs meeting nose to nose. He asked about her dog's sex, making small talk as she gave hers water and ate trail mix. She moved on, putting distance between them. But later, when she came back down the trail, Hilton was waiting. His motive. According to him, it was just to get her ATM card and PIN. A woman, he reasoned, would be easier to control than a man. But Meredith was no easy target. She was a black belt in martial arts, and when Hilton pulled a knife and made his demand, she fought. She grabbed the blade, slicing her hand, then wrestled the baton from him. For a moment, the 60-year-old predator lost control entirely. "She almost whipped me," Hilton admitted, clearly irritated even in retelling. That little 120-pound girl fought like hell. In the end, sheer persistence won out. He subdued her, zip-tied her to a tree, and left her there while he doubled back to clean the crime scene where her belongings had been scattered. By then, hikers had already found them and moved on. Returning to Meredith, he looped a nylon cord around her neck like a leash and told her he had a gun. He didn't. But the bluff worked. She cooperated. Hilton marched her off the mountain into his van and chained her to the frame beneath the front seat. Then he put her dog Ella in her own car. He drove toward Blairsville, planning to find an ATM. But the cards didn't work. Meredith gave him wrong PIN numbers over and over. In Gainesville, in Canton, in multiple banks, he tried and failed to withdraw cash. Each attempt left a digital breadcrumb for police to follow. What Hilton didn't realize was that this was no accident. Meredith was buying time, forcing him to keep her alive. Every failed transaction was a message to investigators. We're moving, we're still here. Hilton didn't see it that way. He believed she was just stringing him along, and by the second day, he was running out of patience and money. They camped in the woods, sleeping in the van at night. He tied her ankles while he slept, claiming it was only to keep her from running. At one point, he says there was sexual contact, not forcible, he insisted, though the power dynamic between kidnapper and victim made the claim meaningless. By the third day, Hilton claimed Meredith was at ease with him. He even took her hiking with his dog. She was enjoying herself, he told agents, as if saying it could make it true. Then on January 4th, Hilton told her she was going home. He packed her belongings, let her help load the van. But instead of heading for safety, he drove to a remote section of Dawson Forest. He chained her to a tree, walked back to the van, and grabbed an iron jack handle. Returning, he pretended to unlock her chain, then struck her in the head. She put her hands up, pleading, but he kept swinging until she collapsed. He hit her at least 19 times. Once you take someone, Hilton told agents coldly, you either kill them or you get caught. Afterward, he decapitated her with a serrated kitchen knife, poured bleach over her body to destroy DNA, and took her dog to a busy shopping center, leaving it where someone would find it. If you think that's where the story ends, if you think Hilton's reign of terror began with Meredith or Cheryl, you're wrong. Because when the federal investigators started digging into his past, they discovered that only 2 months before Cheryl Dunlap vanished, an elderly couple had disappeared in North Carolina's Pisgah National Forest. And Hilton, it turned out, had been hunting for a long time. In October of 2007, well before Cheryl Dunlap's smiling face appeared on missing person flyers, Gary Michael Hilton was already on the prowl. His target then wasn't a young hiker or a lone nurse. It was a retired couple simply enjoying the autumn beauty of North Carolina's Pisgah National Forest. John and Irene Bryant were in their 80s, married for over half a century, and known for their love of the outdoors. On October 21st, they set out for what should have been a peaceful day in the mountains, but Hilton saw something else entirely. He later admitted that he spotted them as they got out of their car. He approached with calculated confidence, demanding their credit cards. When John refused, Hilton pulled out his expandable police baton and struck him. Pepper spray followed. Irene tried to defend her husband with her walking stick, but Hilton's blows knocked her to the ground. The forest that had been their sanctuary became a crime scene. Irene never left it alive. Hilton killed her on the spot. John was forced into Hilton's van. His card used to withdraw $300 before he was driven into the remote Nantahala National Forest. There, Hilton executed him with a single gunshot to the head. For months, John's body wasn't found. Only later would Hilton's attorneys inform him that search teams had discovered a skull and pelvis deep in the wilderness. Even then, Hilton's reaction was cold, clinical. Another page in the ledger of his rampage, as he called it. Just 5 days after killing John Bryant, Hilton crossed paths with that Cherokee County deputy on private hunting land in Georgia. His white van was parked in plain sight. The deputy, thinking he'd stumbled across a harmless camper, chatted casually and let Hilton go. In the deputy's dashcam footage, Hilton can be seen wearing a cap eerily similar to the one worn by the masked figure in the ATM video from Cheryl Dunlap's case. But no one knew it then. By late November, Hilton had drifted to Florida, setting up camp in Leon County. A Forest Service ranger spoke with him there on November 17th, just 2 weeks before Cheryl disappeared. The ranger even ran the plates on Hilton's white Chevy Astro. They came back clean. At the time, Hilton had already killed twice. That's the unnerving truth about him. He wasn't some shadowy figure hiding in the dark. He moved in plain sight, chatting with law enforcement, blending into the world with a dog at his side and a camper's gear in his van. But Meredith Emerson's disappearance on January 1st, 2008, shattered his cover. Her description and the detail about the red dog spread quickly through Georgia. Former employer John Tabor recognized him instantly and called the Georgia Bureau of Investigation. That call transformed Hilton from an unnamed person of interest into the most wanted man in the state. 3 days after Meredith vanished, her black lab, Ella, was found wandering into a Kroger supermarket. Microchip records confirmed her identity. Investigators closed in, tracing a call Hilton made from a payphone to a gas station dumpster nearby. Inside, they found Meredith's purse, bloody clothing, and ID cards. Then came the sighting that ended the manhunt. A woman walking her dog spotted a white van at a Chevron in Chamblee, Georgia. The red dog was there. The man matched Hilton's description. He was tossing items into a dumpster, making multiple trips from his van. She called 911, voice shaking. Within minutes, police were on scene. They ordered Hilton to the ground. He complied instantly, making no attempt to run. Dandy the dog was taken into custody along with him, but Meredith was nowhere to be found. At the GBI office, Hilton was still playing his game, feigning illness, refusing to talk. Yet slowly, agents wore him down. When he finally confessed, his words dripped with self-importance as though he were narrating an epic adventure instead of recounting a brutal murder. He described the fight on Blood Mountain, the failed ATM attempts, the days camping in the cold, the moment he decided she had to die. The confession was detailed, even boastful, but it came with a price tag. In exchange for his cooperation and the location of Meredith's body, prosecutors agreed to take the death penalty off the table. On January 31, 2008, less than a month after his arrest, Hilton pled guilty to Meredith's murder. He was sentenced to life in prison in Georgia, but Florida wasn't done with him. The evidence tying Hilton to Cheryl Dunlap's killing was mounting. Her DNA in his van, the burned bone fragments at his campsite, the ATM footage, the matching knife blade that punctured her tire. And then there was the recording. Hilton speaking casually on December 3rd, just 2 days after Cheryl vanished. In the video, he talks about hiding something, his tone disturbingly light. It's not a smoking gun on its own, but in the context of the other evidence, it's chilling. And there was another layer of horror. Hilton's past involvement with a low-budget film in the 1980s. A friend from that era told investigators Hilton had helped craft the plot. A serial killer who released women into the woods so he could hunt them down like prey. The man had essentially been rehearsing his crimes decades before he committed them. When Hilton went on trial in Leon County, Florida, in April 2011, the jury heard it all. The physical evidence, the testimony from witnesses, the chilling parallels to other cases. They watched the ATM footage, saw the mask, heard about his white van and red dog. It didn't take long. The jury found him guilty of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and grand theft. The judge sentenced him to death, the very outcome Hilton had fought to avoid through plea deals in other states. Today, nearly 2 decades after he began what he called his rampage, Hilton sits on death row at Union Correctional Institution in Florida. He has no illusions about ever walking free again. In his mind, society has already decided his fate, but in interviews he still talks, still frames himself as a misunderstood loner, a philosopher, an artist whose life's work was lived on the margins. What's most disturbing is that beneath all the self-mythologizing, Hilton's own words reveal the truth. He was never going to stop. Once you take someone, he said, you either kill them or you get caught. And for years, he'd managed to do the first without facing the second. The Gary Hilton who sits on death row now isn't much different from the Gary Hilton who roamed the forests back then, except that his world has shrunk to a few square feet. His voice, though, remains as unnervingly steady as it was when he described chaining Meredith Emerson to a tree, when he coolly admitted to decapitating Cheryl Dunlap, when he spoke of John and Irene Bryant like they were pawns in a game. To understand how Hilton could drift between states, leave such a clear trail of bodies, and still evade capture for months, you have to understand how he saw himself. In the hours of interviews recorded by investigators, Hilton slips effortlessly between roles. The philosopher, the artist, the survivalist, the pro who claims to recognize other pros in law enforcement. He dismisses ordinary people as posers, insisting that their lives are fake, mere performances. In his mind, he's one of the few truly authentic human beings left, because he lives outside of society's rules. This isn't idle talk. Hilton spent years perfecting the art of appearing harmless while camping on the fringes of national forests. His constant companion, Dandy, was as much a part of his camouflage as his hiking gear and white van. People see an older man with a well-groomed dog and they don't think killer. They think eccentric outdoorsman. He understood this instinctively. He leaned into it. When he was stopped by that Cherokee County deputy just days after killing John Bryant, he was wearing a warm smile, joking about deer hunters, offering up his ID without fuss. He knew how to play the role, to put people at ease. And when it worked, it gave him something invaluable: time. Time to plan his next move. Time to find his next victim. But Hilton's charm, such as it was always a mask. Beneath it seethed a contempt for humanity, especially for women. In his interviews, he describes them in transactional terms, their value rising or falling like commodities in a market. They have all the advantages, he told investigators, and they use them to get what they want. It's this mixture, his calculated use of likability and his deep resentment, that made him so dangerous. His victims weren't random. They were selected for their perceived vulnerability, their isolation, their ability to be controlled. In his mind, this was the art of his hunting. When Hilton described the murders, there was no hesitation, no faltering voice. Instead, there was a kind of pride in the efficiency of it. He talked about weighing risks, whether a male victim might fight harder, whether a couple might leave him with no choice but to kill both. He viewed every encounter through a predator's lens. Control them quickly, eliminate the risk of identification, and, above all, don't get caught. Yet for all his self-professed cunning, Hilton's downfall came because of something he could never control: his victim's resistance. In Cheryl Dunlap's case, she may have been ambushed, her tire punctured deliberately to force her to stop in a remote location. In Meredith Emerson's case, she fought like her life depended on it, because it did. That fight bought her time, left evidence on the trail, and set in motion a search so intense it made Hilton's usual hiding spots unsafe. And here's where his self-image as a master manipulator ran headfirst into reality. While Hilton thought he was stringing Meredith along to get her PIN numbers, she was using that very delay to leave a breadcrumb trail for investigators. The more failed ATM transactions, the more digital timestamps, the more opportunities for police to triangulate where they were. He underestimated her, and it cracked his plan open. Still, he was methodical enough to keep moving, camping in isolated spots, using his van as both transport and prison cell. He rotated between intimidation and feigned kindness, telling her she'd be going home one day, taking her on hikes, making coffee by the campsite. But those moments of false comfort were just another layer of control, because Hilton had already decided she wasn't leaving alive. His logic was chilling in its simplicity. Once you take someone, you either kill them or you get caught. He applied that rule with the same detachment you might use to describe a hunting regulation. In his mind, there was no moral debate. It was just math. And that's perhaps the most disturbing part of Gary Hilton. Not the brutality of his crimes, but the ease with which he justified them to himself. In his worldview, murder wasn't an aberration. It was the inevitable conclusion to the hunt he had set in motion the moment he approached someone on the trail. By the time Florida prosecutors brought him to trial for Cheryl Dunlap's murder, Hilton had been locked up for years, but he was still performing. Even on death row, he seemed to relish the attention, the media coverage, the infamy. He told another inmate he was going to play the crazy card. He talked about how, during his perp walk, he dove headfirst into a police car just to make it look more dramatic on television. The jury in Florida didn't buy any of it. The evidence was overwhelming, the brutality undeniable. They sentenced him to die. And yet, in interviews, Hilton still returns to the same themes. Society wronged him, people are cruel, he's an outsider who saw through the lies of ordinary life. He talks about his earliest memories being of death, about looking at his hand as a child and imagining it as a skeleton someday. He frames his life not as a collapse into violence, but as a conscious rejection of the rules everyone else lives by. But peel away the philosophical posturing, and what remains is a man who stalked, abducted, and murdered strangers for money, and perhaps for the thrill of control. Gary Hilton was a hunter, yes, but his prey wasn't deer or bear. It was people who crossed his path in the wilderness, people whose absence would barely ripple through the noise of the wider world, at least until someone found what he left behind. By the first week of January 2008, Hilton's hunt had reached its inevitable breaking point. He'd already killed 3 people in 3 different states over the previous 10 weeks. He'd dodged questions from law enforcement, camped under the radar, and driven thousands of miles in his battered white Chevy Astro van. But his latest target, 24-year-old Meredith Emerson, was proving harder to erase. The pressure was closing in from every direction. News of her disappearance had spread fast. The description of an older man with a reddish dog on Blood Mountain was everywhere. Witnesses had placed him near her, and now failed ATM transactions were leaving a trail of electronic breadcrumbs. Hilton knew the window for escape was narrowing. He and Meredith had spent days together in the woods, the balance of power always tilting in his favor, but her presence was a constant liability. She'd seen his van, knew his dog's name, had heard his voice. In Hilton's rigid logic, there was no alternative. If he let her go, she'd identify him and he'd be caught. On January 4th, he decided to end it. He told her she was going home, let her help pack up the campsite, even made a show of gathering her belongings as if preparing for release. But instead of driving her to safety, he steered the van into a remote section of Dawson Forest, a place thick with trees and far from the reach of any passerby. He chained her to a tree, left briefly, then returned with a heavy iron jack handle. Pretending to free her, he struck without warning. Meredith raised her hands in defense, but the blows kept coming, over and over, at least 19 times until she collapsed and did not get back up. The violence was swift, calculated, and cold. For Hilton, it was a grim chore that had to be completed before moving on to the cleanup. He decapitated her body with a serrated kitchen knife, poured bleach over it to destroy DNA, and then took her dog, Ella, to a busy shopping center so she would be found and cared for. Even at his most ruthless, Hilton drew a line at harming a dog, perhaps the only living beings he ever showed genuine attachment to. When Meredith failed to come home, her friends and family already feared the worst. The discovery of her dog had brought fleeting hope, but that hope was gone now, replaced by the reality of Hilton's confession. A few hours later, the endgame came at a Chevron gas station in Chamblee, Georgia. A woman walking her dog spotted the white van, the red dog, the man matching the description she'd seen on the news. He was making repeated trips to a dumpster, throwing away items. She dialed 911 with trembling hands. The police arrived fast. Hilton didn't run. He went flat on the ground as ordered, letting them cuff him. Dandy was taken into custody with him, but Meredith's body wasn't there. She was still out in the woods, hidden where Hilton thought she'd remain undiscovered. Back in the interview room, Hilton tried to control the narrative. He fancied himself a skilled negotiator, a man who could trade information for concessions. He offered to lead investigators to Meredith in exchange for a guarantee he wouldn't face the death penalty. Prosecutors agreed. When he finally brought them to the site, the forest was quiet, winter air biting. Investigators found her body right where he said it would be, though her head and some clothing had been placed elsewhere nearby. The brutality was laid bare, bleach burns on her skin, broken bones, and the crushing head injuries Hilton had described. The deal spared his life in Georgia, but Hilton's past was catching up with him. In North Carolina, the bodies of John and Irene Bryant had been recovered. In Florida, evidence from Leon County campsites and ATM footage tied him directly to Cheryl Dunlap's murder. And unlike Georgia, Florida was prepared to seek the death penalty. His trial in Leon County in April 2011 was a damning procession of witnesses, forensic evidence, and digital trails. Jurors heard about the masked figure using Cheryl's ATM card, the matching knife blade that punctured her tire, the burn pit with human remains, the DNA from her van. They even learned of Hilton's bizarre connection to a low-budget 1980s film, Deadly Run, in which a killer hunted women in the woods, a plot Hilton himself had helped develop. The verdict was unanimous. Guilty of first-degree murder, kidnapping, and grand theft. The judge sentenced him to death. For the families, the verdict was justice, but not closure. They had endured years of uncertainty, nightmares filled with what their loved ones had endured, and the knowledge that this man had walked free for so long. Even on death row, Hilton hasn't stopped talking. In recorded phone calls and interviews, he still describes himself as a victim of society, still clings to the myth of being a misunderstood outsider. He says his earliest memory is of death, of looking at his own hand as a child and imagining it as a skeleton someday. He frames his crimes as inevitabilities born from circumstance, not as choices he made, but his own words tell the real story. They reveal a man who thrived on control, who viewed human life as expendable, and who saw murder as simply another tactic in the hunt. Once you take someone, he said, you either kill them or you get caught. For years, that logic guided him. For years, it worked. What remains most haunting is how easily Hilton blended in. The friendly older man with the red dog could have been anyone, a neighbor, a fellow hiker, a harmless stranger on the trail. His camouflage wasn't just his camping gear. It was his ability to mimic normalcy, to speak just the right words, to hide the predator behind the smile. In the end, it was the resilience of his victims, the persistence of law enforcement, and the vigilance of strangers who noticed the van and the dog that finally stopped him. But the timeline of his crimes raises unsettling questions. How many others might there be? How many trails might hide stories that were never uncovered? As of today, Gary Michael Hilton remains on death row at Union Correctional Institution in Florida, awaiting the sentence he once thought he'd outsmart. His rampage, as he proudly called it, has been reduced to a collection of case files, crime scene photos, and recorded confessions. But the forest where he hunted still stands, quiet and inviting, and that's perhaps the most chilling thought of all. that evil doesn't always lurk in the shadows. Sometimes it walks in plain daylight with a dog at its side and a smile on its face, until the moment it decides you are next. If you found this story gripping, and believe others should hear it, share it. And if you want more in-depth, cinematic breakdowns of cases like this, make sure you're subscribed and notifications are on. The next case we uncover may just change the way you look at strangers forever.